The X-Men, one of Marvel's most popular and iconic superhero teams of all time, even outside the realm of comic books, and for good reason. For starters, you've got an expansive roster of recognisable, compelling and beloved mutants like Scott Summers, aka Cyclops, the man with a plan, the stoic straight-faced leader who is constantly shouldering the responsibility of leading the X-Men. You have Professor Charles Xavier as well, the man with the dream, fighting for the rights of all mutants whilst helping them live with their gifts at the Xavier Institute. And of course, who doesn't know about Wolverine at this point? Arguably the most well-known mutant, a lone wolf with an attitude discovering his mysterious and shady past. I mean, I could go on, Storm, Beast, Nightcrawler. There's so many badass intriguing characters that you can sink your teeth into. But what good are heroes without supervillains and foes to face? Well, thankfully the X-Men franchise has got you more than covered in that area. Magneto is one of the best villains in Marvel and, dare I say it, in fiction as a whole. This is largely due to the fact that it's debatable whether he's actually a villain or not. Sure, his methods are extreme, but his intentions are genuine, and always have been. Some would argue that his actions are justified given the odds that mutants face. How about Apocalypse, the inevitable, the foe that cannot be stopped? Hell, the X-Men don't even need to fight against other mutants. William Stryker is a prime example of this. Through influence and charisma alone, he can turn humanity against the mutants. Which brings me to the main crux of what makes the X-Men so special. What makes them stand out amongst numerous other superhero teams. And that is the struggle against prejudice and the fight for acceptance and coexistence. The X-Men are all mutants. Humans born with the X gene that gives them a unique power, whether it's controlling the weather, reading minds, or shapeshifting. Naturally, this very idea inspires fear in humanity, and some people even use it for their own political gain. But at the end of the day, they're just people. The X-Men are fighting two battles simultaneously. On one hand, they're dealing with superpowered villains, and on the other, they're fighting for political optics and rights. The latter is a theme that resonates with a lot of people, and it's something unique to the X-Men themselves. Given their insane popularity and resonance with audiences, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, it's not surprising that the X-Men would eventually end up on the big screen. In the year 2000, we would get the first X-Men film, directed by Bryan Singer. This movie was so successful that it spawned a whole multimedia franchise, as well as an insane amount of sequels and future entries, like hot damn. In this video I'm going to be covering the first 3 X-Men movies. X-Men, X2 and lastly X-Men The Last Stand. These 3 films were the beginning of this huge film franchise, and they almost immediately f***ed it up with the next film after Last Stand, but that's a video for another time. So does the original X-Men trilogy still hold up today? In this current market dominated by superhero media thanks to the MCU? Well, let's find out. Beginning with the movie that spawned this huge impactful series of movies, X-Men. Now before I dive into the meat and potatoes, I'd just like to bring something to your attention real quick. According to my analytics, 98.9% of people watching my videos aren't subscribed. Bruh, that's insane. On this channel I mainly discuss movies and films, with the occasional episode of Quality Corner where I ramble and review the games I've been playing. If you like that sort of thing, you should subscribe to my channel to receive all of my quality content right in your feed. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. X-Men was released in the year 2000 and serves as an introduction to the conflict of mutants versus mankind, as well as some of the key characters in the franchise. The movie begins with a brief monologue about mutation from who we later find out to be Professor Charles Xavier, a mutant pacifist who seeks peaceful coexistence between humanity and mutants. After the opening credits, we transition over to 1944, where we see a young Erich Lenscher being separated from his parents upon arrival at Auschwitz, thus triggering his mutant ability of magnetism, forcing multiple guards to intervene and eventually knock his ass out, unconscious. Of course, we later find out that this young lad is none other than Magneto, the master of magnetism, who, like Xavier, fights for mutant rights. Unlike Xavier though, he argues for mutant supremacy over humanity, deeming Homo sapiens to be inferior. And man, can I just say, like, what an amazing opening sequence this is? You can't help but feel sympathy for Eric in this scene, and his parents being forced away from him as the rain pours down, drowning out his pleading in tears. Damn. It makes his extremist point of view a lot more understandable moving forward. These are the two crucial conflicting ideas that this movie and X-Men media as a whole present. And what better characters to embody these two opposing lines of thought than Xavier and Magneto, respectively? One thing that this movie does really well is the relationship between these two characters, which only gets better and more fleshed out in future entries. They're not bitter enemies who harbour a deep hatred for one another, they're more like, old friends who have a mutual respect for the other, despite their, sharply contrasting beliefs. We see this demonstrated perfectly in the next scene as the movie jumps forward in time to the modern day, where we see a debate take place in Congress between Jean Grey, a student at Xavier's school, and US Senator Robert Kelly. During the argument, Senator Kelly names off a whole bunch of known mutants in advocacy for the Mutant Registration Act. So no, the Superhero Registration Act was not the first registration act to be proposed in Marvel, who for some reason just love registration acts. Registration Act. Essentially, it's a legislative bill that would force mutants to reveal their identities and abilities to the public. Unfortunately, Kelly's speech receives unanimous applause from the people in attendance, much to Jean and Xavier's dismay. It turns out that Magneto was also in attendance, and we get this beautifully shot scene between the two where they briefly discuss the hearing. Charles argues that they should be patient and give humanity a chance, but Eric has heard these arguments before and doesn't want to hear it. Both Xavier and Eric are in a vulnerable position here, alone and with no protection, but they trust each other enough to have a civil conversation despite their grievances with one another. If that isn't an indicator of their former friendship and respect, I don't know what is. Again, I just have to gush about how awesome the cinematography is. Good lord, amazing use of shadows and mirrors. I love it. We cut to another scene with two teenagers doing teenager things. One of them accidentally uses her powers, causing her boyfriend to gag and choke, and not the good kind, eventually falling into a coma as unbeknownst to her, she's a bloody mutant. This is where we are introduced to the second most important character in the movie, Rogue. A mutant with a deadly touch that, if used on other mutants, can absorb their powers. After giving her boyfriend post-touch clarity, she runs away, eventually finding herself in a dingy bar where she meets Logan, or of course, more famously known, Wolverine. A man who, to be honest, needs no introduction. He has metal claws, shady past, healing factor. Come on, you guys know the drill. Wolverine will go on to be the protagonist of the movie and predominantly the rest of the films moving forward. Seeing another person with unique powers like herself, she decides to hitchhike. Aside from the surprise hitchhiker, the ride seems to be going well until they get ambushed by Sabretooth, a member of Magneto's Brotherhood of Mutants. The real one. The one that actually looks like Sabretooth, not the butchered version we got in X-Men Origins. Anyway, Wolverine gets knocked the fudge out and Rogue forgets how seatbelts work. And just before Sabretooth can attack her, two of the X-Men show up to save the day. Storm and Cyclops. Storm is up there as one of the best characters in the Fox series of films, this trilogy especially. I'm probably going to end up saying that a lot, but still, I think it's due to the fact that she takes the role of the anchor between Xavier and Magneto's ideas, which is usually filled by Cyclops. One of the struggles she has is dealing with her dislike and fear of humans, which came about because of their continued ignorance when it comes to mutant rights. I'm not sure if that's a trait of her character in the comics, but it's a welcome addition to the film, as it adds a lot more layers to the divide between humans and mutants. It's a heck of a lot more effective coming from Storm, who is probably one of the most powerful mutants, period, with her mutant power being total dominance and control over the bloody weather. It's kind of like how we are scared of spiders, despite being obviously more powerful than them. Her character only gets better as we go on, especially in the third film, which we'll get to later. Cyclops, on the other hand, not as compelling of a character in my opinion. A lot of people believe that the X-Men movies utterly gutted his character, being nothing more than a cockblock for Wolverine and just, an unlikable, fun-hating douche overall. While I probably wouldn't go that far, as he does have his moments, especially during the final battle where he's actually shown being a leader. But it's inarguable that the Cyclops we got is definitely a watered down version of the character, compared to the shows and comics at least. This was deliberately done so that all the focus could be placed on a huge jacked man. The real protagonist. In the movies, Scott is a thorn in Logan's side, or is at least seen that way as we follow Wolverine's perspective. So it's no wonder why he has a pretty bad showing. It was actually really jarring watching the movies alongside X-Men Evolution, a show where Scott is the likeable leader that everyone looks up to. Seriously, go watch that show, it's freaking amazing. So after the scuffle with Sabretooth, both Rogue and Wolverine are taken back to the Institute, where we get introduced to Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. A serene, tranquil and safe place filled with lush gardens, surrounded by nature and clean, pristine classrooms. In other words, the opposite of real life school. This is another really cool scene. At first to Wolverine it seems like another Weapon X situation, which, if you don't know, is the shady project that gave him his adamantium bones and erased large portions of his memory in the first place. He wakes up in a hospital bed just as Jean Grey is about to inject him with something, and because of the trauma from his past, he of course freaks out and bolts out of the room, soon discovering in reality that this is actually a quiet place where the mutants can live out their lives in peace. It's a great introduction to the Institute, and the set itself is really calming as well. It gives us an idea of the kind of man Charles Xavier is and what he wants to achieve. Contrast this with the lair of the Brotherhood and the difference is night and day. Literally. Meanwhile, we witness Senator Kelly being kidnapped by the other two members of Magneto's Brotherhood, Mystique and... Toad? Seriously? Of all the mutants you could have picked, you picked freaking Toad. Oh well, at least we get this beautiful dialogue from Halle Berry. Prepare yourselves for one of the best lines in all of cinema.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Mystique, on the other hand, pure badass. Her power is the ability to shapeshift into other people, copying their appearance as well as their voice. That's it. She can't copy their powers or anything because, that would be insane. Despite that, she's a pretty unstoppable force. She doesn't have many lines, which, unlike Cyclops, actually works for her character really well. In the original trilogy, she communicates a lot more through body language and facial expressions compared to dialogue. That's why they made her naked as well. That and, well, the two other glaring reasons that are staring you in the face.
Holy shit.
The reason they kidnapped Kelly is so that Magneto could test out his new device. A machine that emits a cloud of radiation, giving any humans in the surrounding area the X gene, turning them into mutants. Though only Magneto can activate it through his magnetic fields. Though the strain of using the device almost kills him. The machine appears to have been a success, giving Kelly some sort of weird liquidy powers. It turns out that human bodies reject the mutation and end up dying, which is exactly what happens to Senator Kelly himself. Later on we cut to Wolverine having a nightmare, probably about his future role in X-Men Origins. He wakes up panicked and accidentally stabs Rogue in the process, as she came to check up on him. Thankfully her powers come in handy and she manages to absorb his healing factor in the nick of time, saving her life but injuring Logan in the process. So why is this important? Well, this event makes the rounds around the whole school and all the students hear about it, including an undercover Mystique. You see, originally the Brotherhood is believed to be hunting down Wolverine, at least that's what Xavier seems to think, but in reality they're actually after Rogue. You know how Rogue can copy other mutants through touch? Well, the plan is to make her touch Magneto, gaining his powers and therefore his ability to activate his machine. Magneto wants to use his device during a summit on Ellis Island where all the world leaders are gathered in one place and can all be turned to mutants at once. Mystique disguises herself as Bobby Drake, better known as Iceman, a love interest for Rogue. Through this disguise, she convinces her that Xavier is super bloody pissed about what happened and that it would be better if she just left the school entirely. So she leaves, causing Wolverine and the X-Men to go after her. Wolvie catches up with her just before the train takes off, but he's not alone. Magneto also arrives, completely manhandling Logan like a toy. Luckily, he didn't rip out his entire skeleton. I mean, imagine if he did. Like, damn. That would be crazy as fuck. The Brotherhood have Rogue, and Jean uses Cerebro to track down their location. Crap. I haven't talked about Cerebro yet, huh? Basically, it's a device used by Xavier to strengthen his already powerful psychic power, in order to locate other mutants across the world. Jean is also a powerful telepath, but hasn't used Cerebro herself before, so it takes quite a toll on her after using it. Normally Xavier would be the one using Cerebro, but the device damaged his mind when he tried to use it earlier, due to Mystique tampering with it while undercover. All of this leads to the final confrontation. Storm, Cyclops and Wolverine all head to the Statue of Liberty where they face off against the Brotherhood. Badass battle brief, Magneto forces Rogue to activate the machine. With the help of Cyclops, Wolverine is able to destroy the device and donate his powers once again to Rogue, saving her life. There we have it. The day is saved, and wait a minute. Senator Kelly is alive? Oh wait, that's Mystique. Never mind. Anyway, Magneto is placed in this awesome looking plastic set, and we see Charles and Eric playing chess, just to remind us that these two characters are smart, in case you didn't know that already. Look, despite what your opinion might be on the X-Men Fox franchise, you have to give credit where credit's due. This is one of the films that helped popularise the superhero genre and bring it back into the cultural zeitgeist, if you will. It sold like absolute gangbusters at the box office, and like I mentioned earlier, it spawned a plethora of other movies. In my opinion, it's a great freaking movie. The composition is excellent, they nailed the fight choreography, especially whenever Mystique is on screen, and the casting choice is damn near perfect. Overall, I think the biggest success of the film was setting up the world of mankind and mutants, as well as establishing the various characters and their loyalties, allegiances and motivations. I already talked head off about Eric and Xavier's dynamic, but the main takeaway of the film is definitely going to be the duo of Wolverine and Rogue. When we are introduced to Wolverine, he's a lone drifter, competing in bar fights for extra cash as he wanders around in his rank-ass caravan. However, meeting Rogue brings out a new side of him. He takes on a fatherly role of sorts, and they get close because none of them have anywhere to go, finding their solace and place of belonging at the Xavier Institute. I mean, Logan could have left the school at any point, but because of Rogue he chooses to stay. Well, that and the fantasy of potentially getting some poontang from Jean as well. It's not perfect, but the consensus seems to be that it's a solid first outing. A consensus I can agree with. Thankfully, I'm happy to report that it only gets better. Next up is X2. So, X2, or X-Men 2 depending on where you live, was again directed by Bryan Singer and released in 2003. Fun fact, the year I was born. Anyway, the movie was a direct sequel to the prior film, continuing shortly after the events of the first X-Men. Like the first movie, X2 begins with an opening monologue from Charles Xavier. The first movie's monologue introduced us to the concept of mutation, whereas with X2, Charles talks more about the prejudice against mutants from humanity. Sharing the wild has never been humanity's defining attribute. Damn. So sad, but so true. That line still hits hard. It's also very appropriate, the monologue I mean, when you consider the main conflict and narrative themes both X-Men and X2 present. You see, the first X-Men was about mutants versus mutants. The X-Men thwarting the Brotherhood's plan that, if were successful, could have destroyed the reputation of mutants everywhere. X2, as you'll soon find out, is about humanity versus mutants. I know it sounds ridiculous to go on and on about a bloody opening monologue, but it's one of the many examples of this movie's amazing attention to detail, an aspect that helps make X2 so damn good. Also of note is the amazing theme of this movie. The soundtrack of this movie was done by John Ottman, and man, the main theme especially slaps so hard. Like, you could literally put this music over anything, and it would automatically become heroic. After the opening credits, we cut to the White House, where the president is doing presidential things. It seems like just another day at the office when suddenly a blue teleporting mutant infiltrates the building, taking on many guards with the ultimate goal of assassinating the president. He comes very close to succeeding, but just as he's about to stab the president, a guard shoots him, causing the mutant to teleport away, leaving behind his dagger which simply reads Mutant Freedom. So, if you don't know the teleporting badass, his name is
Wagner. But in the Munich circus I was known as the Incredible Nightcrawler.
Yeah, save it. Storm.
We're out of here.
We'll learn more about him later. So far, the X-Men movies have absolutely nailed the opening scenes. We went from that brutal and sympathetic opening at Auschwitz to this absolutely awesome opening sequence of Nightcrawler. On top of this awesome teleporting fight choreography, we also have Mozart's Requiem blasting in the background, emphasising just how big of a deal this is. I mean, the White House seemed like the one place no layman could get in, so seeing a random mutant waltz right in is damn impressive. Plus, if Nightcrawler was to succeed, the consequences would be tremendous. I remember watching this as a kid and being blown away by how cool this was. Nightcrawler was, and still is, one of my favourite mutants, right next to Wolverine of course. Like Shadow the Hedgehog, Wolverine is every kid's favourite. So watching this movie and seeing Nightcrawler absolutely crushing it within the first few minutes was just, beautiful. In my opinion, still the best movie set piece that takes place in the White House. Way better than that stupid ass White House Down movie. Meanwhile, Logan is exploring a seemingly abandoned facility up at Alkali Lake in Alberta. Keyword seemingly. Keep that in mind. The facility that seemed to have been the base of operations for Weapon X, which Logan finds out about after having Charles read his mind at the end of the first X-Men. Unfortunately, there's nothing there of importance that can shed light on Logan's past, so he returns to the mansion with no new info. At the same time, the X-Men and the students at the Institute are on a field trip at a museum. One of the mutants on the trip, Pyro, who has the ability to manipulate fire, ends up stirring up BS, causing Iceman to use his powers in public. Before anything further can go down, Xavier manages to freeze every human in the room with his mind. Yeah. If you hadn't noticed, Charles is one of the most powerful mutants, period. They all leave the museum after seeing a broadcast about the attack on the president, not wanting to cause an incident. Using Cerebro, Xavier locates Nightcrawler, and Storm and Jean are sent to retrieve him as Charles and Cyclops go to the prison where Magneto is being held, in order to question him, leaving Wolverine to stay and babysit the students at the school. Storm and Jean find Nightcrawler in a church, and after a brief confrontation, he joins them. Apparently he had no idea about the attack on the president. Kurt is a Christian pacifist who wouldn't dream of hurting anyone, so why did he attack the president? Something is definitely amiss here. Also, again, I have to gush about the attention to detail in this movie. Kurt doesn't have fur in this iteration, so instead they gave him angelic markings all across his skin. One for every sin, as he states. This is a movie-specific attribute to the character, but it works really well. I know he's quite different in the comic books, but the movie version is pulled off successfully in my opinion. They could have just lazily painted him in blue and be done with it, but they went the extra mile to add detail that overall benefits this portrayal of Kurt. I say this because it complements the movie's emphasis on the more tragic side of the character. So after the attack on the White House by Nightcrawler, the government is naturally on edge about mutants, and who better to play on their current misgivings about mutants than military scientist William Stryker, a general that absolutely despises mutants. He informs the president about the Xavier Institute and the fact that they have a giant ass jet hiding in the basement, which, yeah, does sound pretty sus. The president grants him approval to investigate the mansion, so later on in the night when Wolverine is cracking open a cold one thanks to Bobby,
Thanks.
No problem.
the school gets stormed by an army of Stryker's men. Progressing forwards, do you remember how Mystique assumed the identity of Senator Kelly at the end of the first movie? Well, she's been using that to ease the political vitriol towards mutants that arose from the original Kelly, and she's been undercover with the goal of rescuing Magneto. She manages to access a computer which has information about Magneto's whereabouts, as well as the guard details. On top of that, she also happens upon another folder. And no, it's not an NSFW homework folder, it's actually schematics for a second Cerebro. Stryker is up to some shady ass shit. Whilst printing off the details, Deathstrike walks in, but thankfully she manages to finish printing and escape under the guise of the janitor, which doesn't really make sense. I mean, why would they let a janitor into a secret room that requires fingerprints to open the door? I don't know, but whatever. Moving on. Before we cover the attack on the Institute, we cut to Xavier and Magneto having a brief conversation. It's revealed that Magneto's told Stryker everything. And I mean everything. He told him about the mansion, Cerebro, the mutants at the school. He revealed a crap ton about the Institute to Stryker, though not of his own free will, as Stryker seems to be using some strange chemical to manipulate his actions, making him say and do what he wants. There's a scar on the back of his neck, very similar to the one Nightcrawler had. Before Xavier can act, both of them are knocked out by gas, and Cyclops gets attacked by Stryker's assistant, Lady Deathstrike. Thank you again, Cyclops, for doing nothing and being completely useless. So, Stryker's men come crashing into the school, and we get this awesome set piece of Wolverine fighting off the military forces while defending and saving the students. I mean, not only are we getting some more amazing action, but it also shows just how far Logan has come as a character since the first time we saw him in the first film. It's pretty gratifying seeing him be a hero and saving people we didn't give a crap about not too long ago. Colossus, one of the older mutants at the school who can turn his skin into metal, escorts a group of kids out the mansion safely. Though, unfortunately, not all of them were as lucky, as many of the kids ended up getting abducted by Stryker during the initial ambush. Meanwhile, Wolverine, Iceman, Rogue and Pyro manage to reach a secret exit out of the school. Just before they can leave though, Wolverine shuts the door after the exit, so he can hold off Stryker's army personally. Before they can probably go at it, Stryker arrives and actually appears to recognise Wolverine somehow, making him hesitate. Iceman creates an ice wall between Stryker and Logan, much to Logan's chagrin. There's actually this really cool reverse shot of Wolverine and Stryker staring at each other's silhouettes through the wall and placing their hands together. It's actually really messed up if you think about it. Usually whenever two characters are separated by a wall, it evokes a sort of sadness. They're so close yet still segregated. The greatest example of this I can think of is in Arrival, and Also the boy in striped pajamas as well. But in this movie, Stryker is an absolute piece of garbage. Like the most detestable human being imaginable, as we'll soon see. But because Logan knows so little about his past, he can't help but seek him out. It makes this whole scene uncomfortable, especially on a rewatch. Tempted to stay and talk with Stryker, Wolverine eventually makes the right decision to leave with Rogue and the rest of the students, ensuring their safety. The X-Men make a break for it on one of Cyclops' cars. Wolverine stealing Scott's stuff is a running joke throughout these movies. Again, the amount of disrespect this man gets is insane. Rip Cyclops fans. All 10 of you. They set out on a road trip to Boston to regroup with Jean, Storm and newly recruited Nightcrawler. Also in Boston is Bobby's parents' house, which they decide to make a stop at to rest up until they can contact Storm and Jean. Catching back up with Professor X, he wakes up in some sort of facility with Stryker and his assistant. Stryker explains that the metal brace on Xavier's head prevents him from using his psychic power. They have a debate about mutants and it's revealed that Stryker hates mutants because his son was one. He actually enrolled his son Jason into the Xavier Institute, hoping for some sort of cure, but of course, that's not what Charles is all about. Instead, Xavier teaches him how to control and live with his powers. When Jason returns home, he's not cured, and he opposes his parents, eventually leading to his mother's death by the hands of Jason's power. The ability to control people through some sort of aura around him. Stryker manages to develop a chemical based on his son's power, which he has been using on various mutants like Nightcrawler and Magneto. Even his assistant Deathstrike is being controlled. Xavier realises that Stryker caused the assassination attempt in order to manipulate the president. Stryker admits his chemical would not be strong enough to work on the professor, so he brings in his mutant son Jason to influence Professor Xavier's mind, getting him to use his version of Cerebro to kill every single living mutant on Earth. An unprecedented level of genocide. Speaking of Stryker though, this brings me to a point I want to mention real quick. Stryker in the movie is vastly different from his comic counterpart. In the comics, he's actually a Christian televangelist with a large following, though his motivations and plan to genocide mutants is the same. To be honest, I'm not sure which version I prefer. On one hand, the concept of this crazy ass mega rich televangelist with enough money and followers to fund this insane crusade is pretty cool. Plus it's a lot more apt when talking about the kind of people that spread hate, propaganda and misinformation, which is pretty much the job of a fundamentalist televangelist. However, it does make a lot more sense for Stryker to be in an official position in government, receiving direct approval from the president, whilst also having some deep hidden secrets to hide his real goals and motivations. I also like how they wrote Stryker to have established connections with the X-Men, specifically Charles and Logan. It makes the conflict that more personal, and the narrative that more engaging. Stryker is a very different villain compared to Magneto. Despite Eric's actions being extreme, we can still sympathise with his point of view, because he has standards and morals. He won't kill unless absolutely necessary, and despite Charles technically being his enemy, he never tries to harm him. Magneto is a villain, but a respectable one, with admirable goals. Stryker on the other hand is literally pure evil. He has a similarly sad backstory with the death of his wife at the hands of his mutant son, but we the audience don't feel any sympathy for him whatsoever. That's because unlike Eric, he has no morals. He doesn't draw the line anywhere. No action is too heinous for him. Hell, Stryker literally keeps hold of the children from the Institute at his base of operations, purely so he can know that their mutants are dying for certain, and that his plan succeeded. Like, Jesus Christ. Regardless of your opinion on which version of Stryker is better, you have to admit that the movie did a great job with Stryker's characterization, and Brian Cox absolutely knocks out the park with his performance. We transition back to Magneto's plastic prison, where one of the guards is about to give Magneto some grub, as is the routine. However, Magneto notices something different about him. You see, earlier on, the same guard got close to Mystique. Big mistake. She drugs him and injects some liquid which actually turns out to be iron, causing the guard to have more iron in his blood than usual. Magneto notices this and then forces the iron out of the guard's blood, converting it into solid balls which he then uses to break all the plastic and escape his cell. Yes, Magneto escaped prison with balls of steel. Well, it's iron, but still, I wanted to use that line, so screw it. But man, the attention to detail though! Okay, I know I'm a broken record at this point, but seriously, it is one of the defining strengths of this movie. Magneto lifts up the guard, rips the iron out of his body, and you can even see the remaining droplets of blood being squeezed out as he converts them into solid balls. The whole time seeing the guard slowly passing out in the iron's reflection. For 2003, these CG effects are bloody amazing. Plus, this whole scene perfectly demonstrates just how much of a force of nature Magneto truly is, and of course, he has to have the final word.
Mr. Lorio, never trust a beautiful woman, especially one who's interested in you.
Going back to Wolverine's group, they reach Bobby's house, which is empty, until his parents awkwardly show up. Bobby's parents don't know about his mutation, and when they find out, their reaction is priceless. We get this amazing line from his mom.
Ollie, have you tried not being a mutant?
Unfortunately, Iceman's brother has been completely sold on all the anti-mutant propaganda, and phoned the police upon finding out about Bobby's mutation. It's pretty cool seeing how a civilian is affected by the political storm around mutant kind. So far we've seen politicians and people in Congress argue for and against the rights of mutants, but we haven't seen the civilians processing these events, and the portrayal we get is what I'd imagine to be pretty damn accurate if this was a real life situation. The Drake family aren't super insulting or violent against the mutants, but they are quite passive aggressive and woefully ignorant of their situation, to a patronising degree. Of course they ain't got time for that police BS and they refuse to go with them. One of the cops asks Wolverine to drop his weapons, which, it's kinda hard to do, and even when he sheaths them, the cop shoots anyway, clearly panicked at the situation. Actually it's kind of disturbing how closely this resembles real life cases of police shootings, now that I think about it. So Pyro, thinking Wolverine is dead, is clearly freaked the fudge out, so naturally he lights them all up, destroying the police who had arrived. Luckily, Storm and Jean arrive in the X-Jet just in time, and they can all take off. Turns out they aren't alone in the sky. The military sends fighter jets to attack them. Gee, thanks Pyro, you sure helped out the X-Men by blowing up those bloody cops. They try to dodge the missiles, but eventually they get hit, blowing a hole in the X-Jet, causing it to crash and resulting in Rogue getting flung out back into the sky. See, if only she had her ability to fly like in the comics, then she would be dead right now. Oh wait. Nightcrawler teleports midair and catches her. Damn, they could not resist making the sky look cool, could they? Unfortunately, the X-Jet goes down in flames, killing all of the X-Men on board. Cue the credits. Well, that could have happened in an alternate timeline or something. Fortunately, they are saved by Magneto and Mystique. During a campfire, Magneto tells the X-Men everything, informing them about Stryker's plan to kill every mutant using Xavier's bootleg Cerebro. Magneto also reveals to Wolverine that Stryker was the one who grafted adamantium onto his bones through the Weapon X project. Mystique has the layout of the base, but they don't have the location. In order to get that, they need someone who has actually been to the base before. Don't forget, Nightcrawler's assassination attempt was all the work by Stryker, meaning he at one point kidnapped him and took him to the base, to give him the control juice. That's what I'm going to call it from now on. Jean reads Kurt's mind, finding the base's location, Alkali Lake. Wait, what? Wolverine travelled there in the beginning and it was abandoned, nothing but ghosts. Well, that's because the real base is deep underground. Now before they head over to the location, there's this awkward scene where Mystique tries to bang Wolverine for no reason, which is really weird and out of nowhere. Like, why would Mystique do this? Like, I know Huge Jacked Man is ultimate husband material, but Mystique doesn't strike me as the type of character that would care about that kind of thing. She's always used seduction and going down to Pound Town as a tool rather than actively seeking it out. With that aside, all the grown-ass mutants infiltrate the base. No kids allowed, so Iceman, Pyro and Rogue are forced to stay behind. With the help of Mystique disguised as Wolverine, they all manage to get inside, though Stryker's gone further inside the facility and eventually they're forced to split up. Magneto and Mystique go to disable Cerebro before brainwashed Professor X can activate it. Storm and Nightcrawler rescue the captured students, and Jean fights Cyclops, who has also been given Stryker's special juices. Which, now that I think about it, sounds kinda sus looking back over the script, but oh well. So Jean engages Cyclops, who shoots a couple of beams and loses. I mean, yeah, that sentence could pretty much sum up Cyclops throughout all of the X-Men movies. However, a brief clash of powers between the two results in an explosion causing their dam to start rupturing and the base itself to begin collapsing. Meanwhile, Wolverine heads off alone to confront Stryker. inevitably running into the Weapon X facility where his adamantium was grafted. We've seen this facility briefly in X-Men 1, so it's pretty cool to finally be able to see it in detail as opposed to blurry flashbacks. The camera pans around the room and we even see cool details like scratch marks clearly left by Logan when he escaped the base, as well as X-ray images foreshadowing the experimentation done to Deathstrike. After seeing the facility in person, Wolverine experiences some PTSD flashbacks where finally all his memories start coming back to him. Man, they don't pull any punches with them either. Like during the flashback we see Logan waking up screaming, covered in blood, in the same room, yet somehow even more dimly lit. It's some pretty brutal body horror, but totally fitting for the more violent, extreme nature of the character. Overall, Wolverine seeing the Weapon X facility again is such a badass sequence. I hope they don't ruin it in another movie or anything. Logan isn't alone, as shortly thereafter, Stryker enters the room, along with a brainwashed Deathstrike. Wolverine goes for Stryker, but Deathstrike intervenes and the two duke it out. Deathstrike has adamantium fingernails and a super godlike healing factor, just like Wolvie. After a dope choreographed fight, Wolverine eventually takes the W by injecting her in the stomach with piping hot adamantium. The mind control actually wears off just as she's about to die. I mean, damn. That's pretty depressing. Like, she's been an adversary to the X-Men throughout the whole movie, but not of her own choice. It just reinforces how much of a depraved piece of garbage Stryker truly is. After Deathstrike's defeat, Wolverine chases Stryker to a helipad where he chains him to the wheel, resisting the urge to kill him. When it comes to Magneto and Mystique, they manage to find Charles in the midst of Jason's control, under the orders of his father. Luckily for them, they have just the right person for the job. Mystique impersonates Stryker and orders Jason to stop, but of course this is freaking Magneto, so naturally it doesn't end there. Mystique, under the guise of Stryker, orders Jason to make Xavier kill not the mutants, but all the humans instead. Afterwards, the two M's make their way to the helipad, attaching Stryker to a wall so they can use a helicopter to make their great escape. They also recruit Pyro into the Brotherhood, as throughout the movie Pyro has shown resistance against Xavier's teachings, being somewhat of a hothead. No pun intended. On top of that, on the way to the facility in the X-Jet, he has a brief combo with Magneto, ultimately being swayed by his ideals of superiority. Eventually, the X-Men all regroup once again, aiming to put a stop to Magneto's fuckery. Nightcrawler teleports Storm into Cerebro where she creates a storm, throwing off Jason's concentration and in turn freeing Xavier from his control. Yay! The day is saved! But the X-Men are still trapped next to a dam which is about to be completely engulfed by water. Thankfully, Rogue and Iceman show up with the X-Jet and they make their escape while Stryker dies from getting a bit too wet. Good riddance. Of course, things can't just go smoothly, can they? The X-Jet starts malfunctioning and they're all about to be submerged in water. All seems lost until Jean, using her psychic powers, raises the jet above the water, sacrificing herself in the process. Yep, she's dead. Well, unfortunately not for long. On a side note, Jean has always been one of the weaker X-Men for me. Obviously not power-wise, she's bloody godlike, but in terms of personality and character, in my opinion. Not just in the X-Men movies, but in X-Men media in general, with the exception of X-Men Evolution. In the movies, she doesn't really have much of a personality, and mostly exists to be pursued by Wolverine. Trust me, this movie is her best appearance. It only gets worse from here. Finally, before the President can give a speech on his response to the mutant problem, the X-Men burst in, while everyone else in the room is stuck thanks to Xavier's IRL pause powers. Handing over secret files from Stryker's lab, Charles warns the President that humanity and mutant kind must work together to achieve peace, which seemingly manages to reach him. Before the credits roll, we see a Phoenix logo form the ocean. Huh? What? Yeah, so throughout the movie, Jean has been struggling to control her psychic powers as they continually grow in strength. Before she died, she actually got engulfed by flames, hence why it's a phoenix. So this basically confirms that Jean probably isn't dead. And we will see the results of that in the next movie. Oh god. But yeah, that's X2. One of the best, if not the best, X-Men movies, and I might even say one of the best superhero movies, period. It gets almost everything right. I mean, beautiful cinematography, satisfying character progression, and most importantly, a well-developed villain that you want to see defeated. In this case, a villain you'd love to despise. This movie absolutely deserves credit for nailing the theme of prejudice and the divide between humanity and mutants, providing a variety of perspectives from both sides of the conflict, like the people who hate and revile the other, or individuals that are just ignorant of the issues when it comes to the other side. Not only does it make for a satisfying movie, but it encompasses everything that the X-Men are about, and what sets them apart from other superheroes. In conclusion, it's a great film that I urge everyone to check out, despite the bad rep that the Fox films get overall. So with the first 2 X-Men movies knocked out, that leaves us with the final entry in the original trilogy. X-Men The Last Stand. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Like if you liked, dislike if you disliked. Okay. There's a million things I would rather be doing right now, but I did say I was going to cover all 3 movies, so yeah. X-Men Last Stand, let's get into it. X-Men The Last Stand is the 3rd installment of the X-Men franchise, and was released in 2006, this time directed by Brett Ratner instead of Bryan Singer. The first scene we get is a flashback of Xavier and Magneto recruiting a young Jean Grey back when they were still best buds. Until First Class released, basically retconning the whole movie's existence. Anyway, they discover that she's a powerful telepath with insanely powerful psychic abilities, rivaling that of Charles himself. So this scene sort of indicates that Jean is the focus of the film. I mean, it's the first scene we see and she takes centre stage. She's the most important character in the movie, or at least she's supposed to be. After an unimportant scene between Angel, a mutant with wings, and his father Warren, which we'll touch on later, we cut to present day. The X-Men are practicing in the Danger Room, which is actually the first time we see it, shockingly enough, considering how essential it is to the X-Men mythos. Wolverine, Storm, and a couple of the younger members like Iceman, Colossus, Rogue, and new member Shadowcat who can phase through objects are the ones doing the exercise. I'd say New Mutant, but she's actually been in the prior 2 films. However, this time round she's actually important, being hit with a recast, much like Lavender in the Harry Potter movies. Kitty Pryde is portrayed by Elliot Page, formerly known as Ellen Page. Just to be clear, like all the other characters in the movies, I'll be referring to Kitty by her gender in the movie and not the actor playing her, just making sure there's no confusion. Anyway, there seemed to be a bit of a love triangle between Rogue, Bobby and Kitty, which is further strengthened by Rogue and Bobby's strained relationship due to the fact that they can't get close to one another. It's a recurring plot point throughout the movie, which I think too much time is wasted on, as there's more important things going on at the same time. Too many things, in fact. It's definitely not the worst part of the movie, not by a long shot, but there's just not enough time spent on it for it to be developed enough for the audience to care. Plus, this movie is half an hour shorter than the next 2, despite having a hell of a lot more ground to cover, as you'll inevitably see. Again, I'll touch on this a bit later on. All seems to be going pretty well, until Wolverine decides to throw a hissy fit, going off on his own, destroying the threat in the Danger Room, and declaring that the youngsters aren't ready to be X-Men. Why exactly aren't they ready? Logan never elaborates on this at all. Even if they aren't ready, that's the whole point of exercising in the bloody Danger Room, so they can practice to eventually be ready to face the dangers ahead. Storm argues with Wolverine and she's completely in the right here. She's teaching them to work as a team defensively, yet Logan changes the rules, goes on the offensive, and then states that they aren't ready. Freaking dumbass, bro. So after the Danger Room debacle, we now transition over to the presidential cabinet, where we see Hank McCoy, aka Beast, acting as the Secretary of Mutant Affairs. I'm assuming the choice to have a Secretary of Mutant Affairs was made after the events of X2, as the events of the prior films would have made a whole lot less sense otherwise. Still, it shows that Charles's plea to the president was not ignored, which to be honest is very cool. Now if only real life presidents could take note, that would be pretty epic, not gonna lie. Beast gets invited to a hearing where it's revealed that they have Mystique in custody. Beast argues that keeping Mystique locked up will only make Magneto angry, though it does give the cabinet some diplomatic leverage over him. This doesn't really add up though. I mean, Magneto despises humans, remember? Why would he ever engage in a diplomatic exchange? Even if he managed to do so, you just know they would screw them over somehow, so I think Beast is full of crap to be honest. However, Mystique's capture is not the reason he was brought to the meeting. The president reveals documents from the FDA that Mystique was trying to steal, hence her capture, which shows that there is potential cure for mutation, which is believed to be viable. Through another mutant, Jimmy, who has the ability to negate other mutant powers, they've managed to find a way to harness his power and use it to remove mutation forever. Obviously this is going to have a huge impact on the mutant community, which is precisely why Hank is there, so they can use his skills of diplomacy to ease the tensions a little bit. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Xavier is teaching a class about mutant ethics, and when it's appropriate to use their powers or not. Charles brings up the example of using psychic abilities to transfer a human consciousness into another person who is brain dead, and the ethical concerns such a situation would cause. Keep this brief little lesson in mind, it's a lot more important than it seems. The lesson is interrupted by Storm, who seems to be troubled given the sudden change in forecast. Given the fact that the president has shown lots of goodwill towards mutants, that and Beast is literally in the cabinet, kind of brings into question why they're continuing to hide. Xavier says it's less about hiding and more about staying wary of the Academy's remaining enemies, and protecting the students. He also casually mentions that he sees her eventually replacing him as the headmaster of the school one day. Naturally, she's completely thrown off guard by that, assuming that Cyclops was to be the ideal successor. Xavier states that he's never been the same after Jean's death. Wow. Why you gotta do him so dirty like that, Professor X? I mean, instead of helping him overcome the trauma and giving him time to overcome the loss, you're just gonna go out on a limb and say he's no longer your favourite? Father of the Year, people. Father of the Year. Storm and Mill Prof X head back inside where they run into Beast, who has come to visit. After a nice, heartwarming, wholesome reunion, Hank tells them about the mutant cure and its effects that are supposedly permanent in turning a mutant into a human. At the same time, the guy we saw in the opening of the movie barging in on his son and discovering he's a mutant is none other than Warren Worthington. He's the one behind the cure, and he's currently making a live announcement informing the public about its creation. And you can bet your ass every bloody mutant in the Xavier Institute is tuned in. The reaction to this revelation is fairly mixed. Rogue is obviously very interested in the cure, but Storm on the other hand is vehemently opposed to the idea, even telling Rogue herself that there's nothing wrong with them and mutation is not a disease to be cured. To be honest, kind of stupid for Storm of all people to say this. I mean, physically she's still hot as f***, plus she's got access to complete control over the weather. There's no downside. Storm doesn't consider for a second other people's mutations, like Rogue's for instance, which literally inhabits her from living in a normal everyday life. As a side note, this could have been a really interesting moral dilemma if properly explored. There are a lot of mutants out there who have abilities that cause them nothing but suffering. At the same time, there are those who have prospered thanks to their mutant powers, or at least have gained advantages over others because of their mutation. The closest analogue to real life I can think of is, hypothetically speaking, they introduced a cure for autism, ADHD, or bipolar disorder. Like mutations, some people have suffered, and some people have prospered despite the condition. If this cure did happen, there are a lot of people who would argue against it, purely on principle. There are a lot of individuals that would claim that their mental problem or condition is a defining part of who they are, and by neutering it, they wouldn't be themselves. The same could be said of Rogue and her mutation. Even though it has harmed more than it has helped, her personality and actions have been influenced by her mutation ever since she discovered it. Speaking on mental illness as a person cursed with the tism, I know my ass would be first in line for a freaking cure, are you kidding me? Bro, sign me up, I'm there day one. Screw the people that say it's a goddamn gift. Hell no. If this movie had focused solely on the cure and the resulting outrage, debate and conflict, it could have been worlds better. Unfortunately, it spends its reduced running time on pointless crap that doesn't forward the plot in any way, like the Rogue Kitty and Iceman love triangle I mentioned earlier, for instance. On top of that, a whole half of the movie is spent on a completely different conflict, which heavily negates any chance of this conundrum being explored whatsoever. Don't worry, we'll get to that half soon enough. So after that's all said and done, we cut later on to a group of mutants in a church discussing the recent news. The majority of them, as you can imagine, are pretty pissed off at the news and the suggestion that they need to be cured. Of course, also present is Magneto, along with Pyro from X2. To be honest, this is actually a really good scene. Magneto has such a commanding presence, and despite him being the villain, I found myself rooting for him. He recruits the majority of the mutants present, including a rather bullshit one named Callisto, who has the power to detect mutants, and super speed on top of that for some reason. I don't use this phrase often, but she is literally the definition of a plot device. Her whole existence is literally for the purpose of progressing the plot forwards, so Magneto and the Brotherhood can know where Mystique, Jean, and later on Jimmy is. She doesn't have much of a screen presence or personality outside of that. Oh well, at least we get this genuinely awesome interaction between the two of them.
You're so proud of being a mutant, where's your mark?
I have been marked once, my dear, and let me assure you, no needle shall ever touch my skin again.
But don't forget about Cyclops, he's still a thing. Barely. Scott has spent the whole movie so far moping over Jean's death, and occasionally hearing her voice in the back of his head. Eventually he heads down over to the alkali lake where Jean died, and discovers that she is actually alive. Dun dun dun! She somehow manages to stop Cyclops from using his space ripper stingy eyes, and they make out. To the death. Jean accidentally kills Cyclops during this interaction. Rest in peace, Scott. We barely knew thee. Which is what the writers intended. We don't even see him die. I mean, later on, Wolverine and Storm investigate the scene and all they find are a pair of floating glasses. If you thought they did Cyclops dirty before, then this is the bloody tiebreaker. Let's recap real quick. In the first movie, he spends most of his time being a douche and getting shoved around by Wolverine, acting as a cockblock between him and Jean. In X2, he continues being a douchey cockblock, being knocked out by Deathstroke with ease, and then doing nothing. And now in this movie, he gets killed off screen not even halfway in. Someone over at Fox must hate Cyclops, because his showing in these movies is beyond poor. Anywho, as I said, Storm and Wolverine go to investigate the scene where they find an alive but unconscious Jean Grey. They take her back to the mansion and after an MRI scan, Xavier theorizes that she managed to survive the flood by using her powers to wrap herself in a cocoon of telekinetic energy? Okay. Charles then reveals that he placed mental blocks in her brain when she was young to limit her potentially limitless power. Unfortunately, this had the unintended effect of creating another personality deep within her psyche, calling itself the Phoenix. Jean was a disciplined, reasonable mind, while the Phoenix was pure instinct and emotion. So now I can finally cover the second biggest plot point of X-Men The Last Stand. You see, this movie juggles both the Dark Phoenix and the mutant cure. This is what ultimately kills the movie in my opinion. They try to tell two stories simultaneously, which inevitably results in both of them failing, feeling dull and unexplored in general. I already talked in depth about why I feel that the mutant cure portion of the film feels half-assed, but the Dark Phoenix plot is equally as lame. Yes, it was hinted at with the prior film, but the results feel so rushed. Jean comes back and the explanation is just, oh yeah, she made like a psychic cocoon or something, and we barely see the real Jean Grey. You know, the same Jean from X1 and X2, not the evil Phoenix version. I thought the whole Dark Phoenix saga was about Jean struggling for control of her own mind. However, in this movie it's only alluded to. Probably because they also have to spend time explaining what's happening with the freaking mutant cure. Also, the Phoenix we get in this movie is not comic accurate in the slightest. The Phoenix in the comics is a cosmic entity that possesses Jean, turning her evil, and the two of them fight for control over her body. Now listen, I don't have a problem with not being comic accurate. But when your version is in every way worse to the book, then it's pretty damn noticeable. Plus, X2's ending showed a flaming bird, which kind of suggests that Phoenix was supposed to be a lot more like the comics. The movie version sucks. End of story. If you hadn't noticed, they're building Jean to be the ultimate threat of this movie. What with the flashback opening and insane demonstration of power when she's rediscovered. She's the big bad, even over Magneto. However, she spends most of the movie doing absolutely nothing. Most of the scenes Jean is in, she's just standing there. Even during the final confrontation until the last few minutes of the film. Wow guys, way to sell the big bad. I mean, just compare it to Magneto and Stryker. Two villains that absolutely stole the show whenever they were on screen. In completely different ways. Even in this movie, Ian McKellen still manages to dominate every time he's on screen as Magneto. Well, I've said my piece. This video is long enough and I want to get this movie over with, so let's continue. Going back to the mutant cure, Warren is preparing to test it on the first subject, his son, also named Warren, better known as Angel. But he's pretty reluctant to do so. I mean, you can tell with all the tension building music and stuff. Changing his mind, Angel rebels and escapes out the window. This is an example of yet another plot dynamic that this movie brings up but never develops and touches on. Spoiler alert, we only see Angel plop up briefly twice after this scene. One of which being towards the end when he saves his dad from certain death. That's it. Wouldn't it have been really cool if we got to see more interactions between the two? Arguing about Angel's mutation and what he wants versus what his dad wants? It would have been neat to see Angel's dad go through an arc, and eventually accepting Angel's mutation and realising he was wrong to pressure his son into getting the cure. But nope, we never see this dynamic bear fruit. Why even introduce these characters if you're not going to do anything with them? This movie is notorious for doing this. It introduces way too many new characters to the point that it's practically impossible to develop them, or give them any time to shine. Using Callisto's magical mutant mapping powers, they managed to find Mystique on an armoured metal convoy. Really guys? 2 movies and you still haven't learnt your lesson? Then again, it's probably impossible to make a car with no metal in it. Bro, they should have had a convoy purely made out of those toy cars with yellow roofs. I think that plan would have succeeded a lot better. Magneto destroys the convoy with ease, releasing Mystique, but not before she can give one of the guards the best death imaginable.
Told you so.
Not a bad way to go, am I wrong? Kinda wish that were me. Mystique is not the only prisoner. Magneto frees 2 other people on the convoy, Juggernaut and Multiple Man, who end up joining the Brotherhood. Before they can leave though, one of the guards fires a shot at Magneto, but Mystique gets in the way, saving Eric in the process, and reverting back to her non-mutant form. Yes, turns out they have weaponized the mutant cure, so Magneto was actually kinda right. With Mystique becoming human, the rest of the Brotherhood just leave her there. Man. Just like Cyclops, Mystique gets royally screwed over in this movie. Mystique is arguably one of the best parts of the X-Men movie franchise, and she just gets unceremoniously wrote out of the film. Like, ugh. Anyway, back at the Xavier Institute, Wolverine is watching over an unconscious Jean, when all of a sudden she wakes up wanting to bang Logan. Things get hot and steamy until Logan realises that the real Jean wouldn't want this, as she chose Scott over him in X2. After dropping his name, the real Jean momentarily regains control, begging Logan to kill her, but not wanting to harm any more people. Wolverine obviously doesn't want to go through with this, insisting on letting Charles help her. Before she can respond, the Phoenix regains control, tears up the place and escapes the school, returning to her childhood home. The X-Men follow suit, but they're not alone. Magneto's Brotherhood has also arrived, thanks to Callisto. Both Charles and Eric want Jean on their side, and so a fight breaks out between the two factions. In an admittedly cool set piece, Juggernaut throwing Wolverine throughout the house is pretty fun to watch, not gonna lie. Magneto and Xavier both begin pitching what they want for Jean, with Magneto wanting the Phoenix to fully let loose, while Xavier wants to bring back the old Jean. However, Phoenix is not having it, causing everything in the house to start flying around, including the bloody house itself. Charles makes one last effort to appeal to the good within Jean, but unfortunately, it doesn't work out, and Xavier is killed in the process. Yep. Professor X is officially dead. Or is he? So with the supposed death of Charles, a funeral is held at the Xavier mansion. None of the mutants are taking the death well, including Wolverine surprisingly enough. Kitty in particular is quite depressed after Xavier's passing, so Bobby decides to cheer her up, creating a makeshift ice rink for them to skate on, all while Rogue watches from a window above. Seeing the two of them happy together is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and makes Rogue leave the mansion to get the cure. Fun fact, there was actually a deleted scene where Bobby and Kitty kiss, which they don't actually do in the final movie. I feel like that scene would have made Rogue's decision to eventually take the mutant core a lot more understandable. Her mutant power prevents her from getting close to anyone, and Bobby is a prime example of that. Seeing him get together with another woman would have made Rogue realise this, triggering the desire to get the cure. The passing of Xavier also brings into question the future of the school itself. All of the X-Men are gathered in Xavier's office, including Beast, who resigned from the cabinet in protest after hearing about how the cure was being weaponized. They're all discussing what to do about the Institute and the children, still in attendance, until Angel shows up asking if this is the place that was a safe haven for mutants. This moment moves Storm to action as she states that he's found the right place, and she'll find him a room to sleep in. Storm is easily one of the best parts of this movie, aside from the whole argument about the cure earlier on. She's matured a lot over the course of the 3 films, and her becoming the head mistress emphasises just how much she has become responsible for the students in her care. Even in this movie alone, she went from being opposed to the idea of leaving the school, to being the first to speak up and offer a mutant in need a place to stay. Bobby goes looking for Rogue at one of the clinics where there's a lot of protesting taking place from fellow mutants. Pyro is also in attendance, using his powers of flame control to blow out all the windows, causing everyone to flee. This is only the beginning of Magneto's attacks, warning the populace that humanity will not be safe until the cure is destroyed. This forces the military into action, arming themselves with plastic weaponry to combat the threat of Magneto and his Brotherhood, which have grown into a pretty sizable army. Oh yeah, Wolverine receives psychic communications from Jean just like Scott did earlier on in the movie, so he sniffs her out, finding her with the Brotherhood in the woods. Kinda suspect that he managed to find her purely on set alone. She must be one hella bad bitch if you smell that foul. Nothing comes of this though, as he just ends up being bitch slapped by Magneto halfway across the forest, so yeah. Later on, the military learn the Brotherhood had to camp in the woods through Mystique, betraying them after being left behind in the convoy, which is just so insanely dumb on so many levels. First of all, how in the hell would Mystique know their current location? She was left behind, and the Brotherhood only became so big and formed a massive camp after she had already been kicked out. It makes no sense for her to just know the location. Second of all, even if we grant that she did know about it, why in the hell would she rat Magneto and the Brotherhood out to the bloody military? She hates humans. Full stop. This has been heavily established in the 2 prior entries. Hell, even in this movie, during her interrogation. I could understand being upset or angry with Eric for leaving her, but there's no freaking way that she would just sell them out. It just comes off as so petty and out of character for her to do. I mean, she is utterly butchered in this movie, and she's not the only character to be treated this way. The military invaded the camp only to find that they have all left, using multiple men as a decoy to make them think they were still there. All of this results in the final showdown. Magneto uses Callisto to locate Jimmy on a small island in San Francisco, instead of using, I don't know, a boat. Magneto legit just casually lifts the whole Golden Gate Bridge up, just so his army can get to the island. Like, what? He barely even strains either, still able to use his powers even after moving an enormous bloody bridge. Look, I'll be honest, it's a cool moment, but Magneto was nowhere near this powerful in the other movies. Magneto sends his army of pawns, as he calls them, to face the military, and most of them end up getting shot with a cure. You see, this is the problem with having so many mutants. Half of them don't use their powers, and it just results in them running into gunfire. There's no way you can imagine powers for over 100 generic mutants, which is why they should have just stuck to having a small or medium-sized group like the X-Men do. Speaking of, the X-Men show up to the island ready to confront the Brotherhood in one final battle. Yeah, it's on now. Naturally, a fight breaks out between the two factions, and Magneto sends Juggernaut to go and kill the mutant kid. Brutal. Thankfully, Kitty's there and she goes after him, reaching Jimmy first. We also get this amazing line.
Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch!
Beautiful. Mwah. I can't decide which is better, the Toad Lightning from Storm in X1 or this. They're both godlike. Shadowcat reaches Jimmy, but of course she can't use her powers in his proximity. She uses Juggernaut's stupidity against him, and he ends up running into the wall, knocking himself out thanks to Jimmy's mutant cancelling powers. The X-Men face off against Magneto, and Wolverine gets Colossus to toss him straight at Eric, just like he did in the Danger Room, which he obviously stopped with ease. But that was all part of the plan, as Beast comes up behind him and injects Magneto with a cure. And with that, the Master of Magnetism is no more. Eric is finished, along with the Brotherhood. However, Phoenix is still a threat. After a bunch of soldiers fire at her, she actually decides to stop standing still and actually do something. Jean starts going absolutely apeshit. Her powers absolutely annihilating everything in the vicinity. The X-Men make their escape except for Wolverine, as he's the only one who could stop her. It's in this scene where he drops this line which really pissed me off.
You would die for them.
No, not for them. For you.
Wow. Really? After all the development we've seen of Logan, after all the times we've seen him head straight into danger to protect the students and his fellow X-Men, after that final scene where he's carrying one of the students to safety in X2, after screaming in terror at Charles' death, after all that, he's just going to say, nah, I'm not risking my life for them, I'm just doing it all for you, babe. Even though you rejected me one film ago. This doesn't even make sense, as in the end of the movie he goes on to become an actual teacher at the school. So what the hell is he talking about? Everything Logan's done has been in consideration for the people at the school, because he's made deep connections with them. They brought meaning into his life, that's the prime motivator for Wolverine's actions. And that's his entire arc in the first bloody X-Men movie. Whatever. It's just a stupid line, I probably shouldn't get hung up on it, but still. One final middle finger to the audience. Actually wait, there's still a few more middle fingers left, hold on. So, Logan kills Jean, the day is saved, Beast becomes the ambassador, Storm assumes the role as the headmaster, Rogue gets the mutant cure and says goodbye to Bobby, and on top of all that we get the scene showing Eric in a park playing chess all by himself. Sad days. He attempts to move one of the pieces with magnetism, and actually manages to nudge it a bit. Cut to black, credits. Wow. Thank you X-Men The Last Stand. Thanks for wasting an hour and 45 minutes of my time on this mutant cure plot, only to have it to be completely mute right at the end, as Magneto could possibly regain its powers. Amazing. That's not all folks, there's also an after credits scene where Xavier talks to Moira, the doctor in the video Charles showed in class earlier, through a brain dead patient. Wow. Thank you X-Men The Last Stand. Thanks for wasting an hour and 45 minutes of my time showing the death of Xavier and all the resulting sorrow and trauma it caused on the students and the X-Men, only to make it completely mute right at the end. Amazing. They didn't even have to wait for a fucking sequel. The movie retcons itself. That's X-Men The Last Stand. I'm not gonna lie, there were some cool moments, like Magneto's conversation with the other mutants at the church. And you know, Storm stepping up to become the headmaster. Stuff like that. But overall, this movie is a goddamn catastrophe. Characters established in prior movies, like Cyclops, Wolverine and Mystique, are completely butchered in this movie. Sometimes literally. Too many freaking new characters resulting in me not caring about any of them. Tons of plot details that are brought up but never explored, like the love triangle and Angel's relationship with his father. But most egregious is this movie's juggling of two different stories, which could have made for their own separate movies, inevitably botching both of them in the process. It's also the movie that would royally screw up the X-Men timeline moving forwards. Days of Future Past brings into question whether this movie actually existed or not. And in the movie The Wolverine, Logan goes back to being a drifter despite being at the academy at the end of The Last Stand. Look, just avoid this movie at all costs. It sucks. Still, somehow as bad as it is, it's not the worst X-Men movie. And that about sums up the plot and my thoughts on all three X-Men movies in the original trilogy. Holy cow, bro. I'm never talking about 3 movies in one video in this amount of detail ever again. Making this video was an absolute nightmare, but with that being said, that brings me back to my original question. Does the original X-Men trilogy still hold up? Well, in my opinion, yeah. Yeah, it does. While it does undeniably suffer from the infamous movie trilogy curse, much like Raimi's Spider-Man, Terminator, Aliens, Superman, The Dark Knight, I mean, Shrek even. Despite that, the other 2 entries are still awesome, and shouldn't be overlooked, especially X2. I know people like to crap on the X-Men franchise, understandably so, as there are a lot of stinkers and a nonsensical timeline to boot, but there are still some gems that stand out above the rest. X-Men The Last Stand is bad, don't get me wrong, but not so bad that it completely ruins the other 2 X-Men movies. The cinematography, acting, narrative themes, and even the special effects still look great to this day. Overall, I would recommend checking out the first 2 X-Men movies, even in 2023. They're still the GOATs of the superhero genre. Just do yourself a favour and stay away from X-Men The Last Stand. It's not good for your health, both physically and mentally. If you made it this far, genuinely thank you, thank you so much. It means a lot to smaller YouTubers like myself. It took me a long time to make this video, not just because of the detail I wanted to go into, but also because of some IRL stuff. But enough about me. Like if you liked, dislike if you disliked, subscribe for more quality content, and I'll see you guys next time.
Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. Have some more chicken. Have some more pie. It doesn't matter if it's boiled or fried.